Picture this. You're handed the keys to the Villisca axe murder house and told, lock yourself in for the night. Do you last until morning, or not even make it past midnight? Be honest. Comment below. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to join the horror party. In the sweltering dark of June 9th, 1912, in a nondescript block of a small southwestern Iowa town, 8 people were killed in their beds by blows from an axe. The town was Villisca, sleepy, ordinary, the kind of place where porch lights stayed on for neighbors and church bells called the weak to order. And the Moore house at 508 East Main would, after that night, become something else entirely. A place where lights refused to stay off, where mattresses kept the shape of bodies that were no longer there, where visitors say the air goes cold the instant you cross the threshold. The Moore family, Josiah and Sarah, and their children, Herman 11, Mary Catherine 10, Arthur 7, and Paul 5, had spent the evening at the annual Children's Day program at their Presbyterian church. It was the sort of small-town ritual that sealed people into routines and made the town feel safe. When the service ended around 9:30, the family walked home together. Catherine, fearing 2 girls in town would have to walk alone, invited Lena Gertrude Stillinger, age 12, and her sister Ina May, age 8, to spend the night. Josiah called and was given permission. Blanche Stillinger, the older sister, said their parents were out and she would tell them in the morning. By 10 o'clock, the children were back inside the Moore house. Lamps turned low, the day's neighbors settling into sleep. The next morning, the quiet fractured. Mary Peckham, a neighbor, was in her yard at dawn hanging laundry when she noticed the Moore house remained dark and still. No children running to chores, no radio at breakfast, no light through the drawn shades. Concern turned to alarm. She walked over, knocked, rapped at the door. No answer. She tried the door and found it locked. She let the chickens out from the coop and, out of worry, ran for Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Ross arrived and tried the front door, shouted for family. The house remained a silence full of wrongness. A spare key opened the door, and what he found in the guest room was so wrong that the rest of the town later swore they would never forget it. 2 bodies under a sheet, blood running to the headboard, a lamp toppled to the floor. Neighbors poured in, then the marshal, Henry Hank Horton, came and found the tableau that would become legend. Plates of uneaten food on the table, a pot of scalded water, mirrors and glass covered by clothing, and an axe propped against the wall in the guest bedroom. Its blade wiped but its handle stained. The scene told a horror both simple and strange. The children, the Moore kids and the Stillinger girls, appeared to have died in their sleep. Blunt force trauma to the skull. No obvious signs of sexual assault. No signs that they had struggled. Sarah Moore alone had suffered wounds from the sharp edge, a cut, a face almost unrecognizable. Josiah's skull was pulverized, brain matter and bone were spread on the headboard, lamps were on the floors, mirrors were draped with cloth. The attic smelled of cigarette butts, evidence, some thought, that the killer had hidden in the rafters until the family returned. Evidence others read differently. A slab of bacon, wrapped in cloth, lay beside the axe. A grotesque riddle later offered 2 conspiracies, both whispered and obscene. Word spread with a speed the town had never seen. Operators threw the all-call. The whistle stations passed the news along. Shops closed. People converged on the Moore house in the way towns do, curious, horrified, instinctively invasive. 100 citizens, perhaps more, marched through the rooms, tracking footprints and blowing dust. their breath and gossip and hands disturbing evidence the marshal had barely guarded. The coroner would later complain the scene had been trampled before examinations could be properly finished. Investigators turned to the rail lines. There had been, in the months before and after Villisca, a string of axe murders in other states. Families killed in their beds, mirrors draped with cloth, lamps fallen from nightstands. Trains made many houses easy to reach. Transient workers rode the rails. So suspicion scattered. To a rival boss, to a traveling preacher, to vagrants, to men who had left confessions in the haze of drink only to recant the next day. The town produced suspects as a farmer produces corn. Frank Jones, a political and business rival who had crossed words with Josiah. William Blackie Mansfield, later accused of similar family murders. Andrew Sawyer, a transient who slept with his clothing on and his work axe within reach. And Reverend George Kelly, a well-traveled preacher with a reputation for strange behavior and an unnerving interest in children. Reverend Kelly's story reads like a ghost of the trial rooms that followed. An Englishman turned itinerant preacher. He'd been seen peeking into windows, arrested for obscene letters, and present in town the night of the children's program. In the days after the discovery, he wrote letters and visited the scene, his interest so sharp and persistent that investigators watched him. He later claimed he had walked by the Moore house that night and heard an axe fall, that a pair of walkers outside had interrupted the killer and caused the man to step onto the porch. Under interrogation in 1917, rough, loud, and some said coercive, Kelly said strange things. He twice confessed, then recanted, spoke of God, and eventually was tried twice and acquitted both times. Some townsfolk left the courtroom convinced a powerful man had hired another to do the killing and then protected himself. Others left convinced a fragile, weird man had been railroaded. The truth stayed stubbornly mute. The investigation wore on like a winter wind. Hands were pointed and then withdrawn. Alibis checked and disproved. Mansfield produced payroll records proving he'd been out of town. Others' confessions were inconsistent or made under the weight of mob pressure. A man named Henry Moore, no relation, later confessed to axe murders elsewhere and spent decades in prison. Detectives wondered if the rail of similar crimes could be one man's path, but the Villisca signatures were unique enough to leave room for doubt. Over time, as families died and old men left the town square, the case slid into unsolvedness. The Moore house closed, then opened, then closed, standing there on its lot like a wound. And yet the house refused to be a mere footnote. Folk memory did what records could not. It kept the story breathing. Visitors came, first in polite curiosity, and then in the more voracious ways of the 20th century. Journalists, thrill-seekers, then paranormal investigators with EMF meters and cameras that promised to catch what the eye could not. People reported cold spots in the parlor, a rocking chair that moved though no one sat in it, a childlike giggle at the edge of hearing, the distinct impression of being watched in the upstairs corridor. Some left with skin raised and vows never to return. Others left with pins and a conviction that the house was a place where grief had organized itself into habit. This script locates itself in that living place. Not a history lecture, not a true crime police dossier, but a portrait of how a violent moment ossifies into legend, and then, in the echo of those legends, creates new disturbances. It begins with three figures arriving in the town on the anniversary of the murders. Claire Hart, late 20s, a documentary filmmaker who believes in story as a kind of exorcism, has come to Villisca to spend a night in the Moore house. She brings with her a camera, a tape recorder, and a notebook full of questions. Ethan Cross, 33, a city reporter who covers human interest pieces for a regional paper and thinks most apparitions are a mixture of boredom and electricity, is skeptical enough to be interested. And Mrs. Louisa Peckham, in her 80s, granddaughter of the neighbor who first became concerned in 1912, is the living memory the town keeps on its mantle. Together, they will step across the threshold and into a night where the past and present rub their faces together. They tour the house by daylight. The wooden porch surrenders a soft squeak underfoot. The parlor still smells faintly of lemon oil and a long-closed furnace. Tours leave patrons with chills. The guest room, where the Stillinger girls died, has the headboard scarred and the mattress sunken in two distinct hollows. The parents' room has a trapezoid of pale plaster where a picture frame once hung. The attic hatch is nailed shut. Louisa points at places no tour guide ever points to publicly. The crescent mark near the stair that her grandmother swore was a blood smear. The third stair from the top worn into a saucer by 1,000 shoes. Claire films it all, her camera lens collecting the textures of old wallpaper and the flaking paint like evidence. Ethan takes notes, his pen moving faster than he expects. Night comes with its small city of sounds. Cicadas wheel beyond town. A half-moon wets the yard with a milky light. The small group sets up in the guest room, where the beds are pressed into corners that make the air feel smaller. The cameras roll. A portable lamp casts long vertical shadows. Claire proffers a battery of gadgets: a cheap EMF reader, an infrared camera, a voice-activated recorder. Ethan scoffs gently, but plugs his recorder in, if only to have something to do. They talk about the murders, about what a family's absence does to a town, about how grief passes like a current in the planks. Louisa tells the story she heard from her grandmother. The way Ross opened the door and the town's marshal said, "My God, Ross, there's somebody murdered in every bed." Claire asks about the slab of bacon. Louisa's hand moves as if to hide the obscene memory. "We wouldn't speak of it in church," she says, "but we spoke of it at the fence. The first few hours are thin, creaks, the house settling, the distant bark of a dog. The kinds of noises a town tells itself are ordinary. Then, at 2 a.m, the small things begin to pile up. The EMF reader flickers, though the batteries are fresh. The infrared camera pulls a white smudge down the stairwell. When Ethan plays it back, it is only the breath of the camera, he says, yet his voice has a surprise in it. Claire walks to the doorway and says she hears someone humming. Like a lullaby, the sort of off-key refrain a child remembers. Louisa's fingers, during the playback, twitch as though she's touched a memory too hot to handle. Later, in the kitchen, they find a plate moved from the table to the sink. No one has moved. The slab of bacon is not there, of course, but a small smear, a darker patch, appears on the tabletop as if some finger had dragged across it and then retreated. Ethan jokes that someone is playing with props. Claire, watching the floorboards, says the house is answering them. Louisa, who knows the long habit of denial, goes suddenly pale and whispers, "Don't keep them away." The night delivers sensations that are easier to record than to prove. Cold that tastes like metal at the back of the throat. The faint impression of a child's breath across the nape of your neck, though no one is behind you. A rocking chair whose rhythm begins slow and then accelerates through the hands that made it are buried. At one point, the recorder registers a voice, a small, indistinct syllable like "Mom." And when they play it back louder, it is only a noise made by the wind in a cracked window. By dawn, exhausted and trembling, they leave the house with footage and fragments of proof and no definitive answer. Ethan writes a column that will print as a curious feature. "The House Remembers," it will be titled. Claire edits a short film that folds archival news, clipping voiceovers, over the black and white footage of the beds. Louisa goes to church and sits quietly in a pew while the sermon drones on. The town looks at her a little longer now that she has spent a night inside. And the house keeps doing what it does, opening its doors to tour buses and investigators, to drunks who swear they see faces behind curtains, to children who throw coins at the third stair. Sometimes the manifestations are slovenly tricks, drafts that push curtains, shadows that form because a camera's exposure misreads a patch of wallpaper. Sometimes they are smaller and sharper, a whisper that names a child, the smell of sugar and soap where no sugar nor soap exists. Either way, the reality of the villagers is shaped by the house. Businesses around the square sell t-shirts and mugs, and villagers collect tips on their knowledge. A kind of economy of memory grows around the wound. As decades pass, the list of suspects lengthens and then atrophies. The theories that a transient struck families along the rails, that a jealous rival hired a killer, that a madman struck under the cloak of night, multiply and then fade. Much of the inquiry turns on the grotesque particularities: the mirrors that were covered, the lamps on the floor, the slab of bacon, the attic cigarettes. Each peculiar detail becomes a tacked-on talisman, an item to anchor speculation. Investigators then and now will point at mise-en-scène and project motive. None of it explains the way 8 lives ended in one crowded night. This script ends not with a solved case, but with a small, stubborn fact. Places keep memory the way people keep pennies in jars. Their surfaces collect impressions. Houses are composed of rooms and of the things people do there. When violence occurs, the actions imprint with an odd permanence. Villisca's house is, in this telling, an object that remembers by repetition. It cycles small phenomena into patterns, and tourists and investigators provide fresh attention like fuel. The Moore family's names continue to be spoken in the town. In a corner of the parlor, someone has placed a bouquet of plastic flowers that never wither. And so the house stands, its windows sometimes bright in the afternoon sun, sometimes black as a socket at dusk. History and legend do their slow, combative work. Some nights the house seems to sleep. On others it moves like a thing recalling a dream. People come and leave with different certainties: that the house is haunted, that grief makes its own ghosts, that the murders were the work of a single monster, that the case will never be solved. Each version of the story is a way of keeping the dead company. The last image, a single child's shoe, white now with age, tucked under the guest room bed. A dust mote hangs in a shaft of light. The recorder, forgotten on a chair, is still tapping out time in a red blink. Outside, the town continues to fold itself in on itself, and inside the house the boards remember every footstep as if it were a cord plucked and left to ring. The Moore family sleeps in a way the living never can, quietly, finally, and the house waits, as houses do, until the next set of footsteps marks the floorboards, and the next voice asks the same old terrible question: who did this?